We have arrived. This is Webb Parton, your host, and we welcome you to the Free Range Dogs podcast. This is a place where we stake out a shady spot and talk about all things dog. Find yourself a soft piece of grass, spin a few circles, plop down, rest your feet, and join us in this joyful conversation. Hi, this is Webb Parton with Free Range Dogs podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this visit today. We're going to be talking with Randy Babb, who's a smart guy. Whenever I talk with Randy Babb, I always learn something. So let's go ahead and greet Randy, and we'll begin to have a conversation. Randy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Randy Babb. I'm a retired biologist from the Arizona Game and Fish Department. I've worked in the wildlife field for about 34 years, first with the Forest Service and then with the Wildlife Department.
I'm hoping that we can explore a topic that's really interested me because, you know, I work with folks a lot, and I'm always trying to explain to people how their dogs perceive the world. The interest about this in free-range dogs is that when you're out there with your dog and you are viewing the world a certain way, really helps to be able to understand how other things view the world. And so I wanted to explore that today, to talk about how other things besides dogs and people gauge the world that they're walking through. Now, of course, the bulk of my work in the past has been aversion work. And if we could, let's begin with snakes, with reptiles, rattlesnakes. Sure. Because, you know, I always try and make the point with folks that we humans have a higher focal plane. We're higher off the ground. So it's easier for us to visually see stuff through our eyes. Our dogs are about a third of that visual acuity level. I mean, that spatial level. And so I make the point that you can see something, but your dog can't physically because their eyes are at a level that they just can't see the ground. And then you add that to the fact that we have color vision, so we can see shape more readily. We can discern shape more readily. Our dogs don't see in color. And so for our dogs, when they look at a rattlesnake, at that lower focal plane, it looks like a gray bump to them. So for our dogs to be able to, quote unquote, see a rattlesnake, it's got to move or make a noise. And that's a problem because rattlesnakes don't survive well when they move and make a noise. They tend to lay there and remain hidden and practice feigning invisibility, and mostly it works. But when you think about it and you go that third step, how is the rattlesnake seeing this perspective? Because their eyes are, half an inch up above the ground, and I know they can see things, but they're not seeing the way a human would understand it. And I'm going to presume that the majority of what a rattlesnake picks up is from those heat pits on the side of their face.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating subject, and it's one that biologists have struggled with for eons, because when you have another species, what we generally learn about the way they see the world is taking apart the eye, looking at the rods and the cones and things like that. And it all gets very complex very quickly. Depending on the type of snake, some of them are night blind. They don't have any ability to see at night at all. They don't have the structures in the eye. And so rattlesnakes, exactly what you're talking about, the level they're at, for a rattlesnake's life, a rattlesnake doesn't need to see, 300 yards, because that is irrelevant to the snake. He's not going to get over there to get that prey item, and if the predator's over there, he's just going to try to avoid it anyway. So some snakes have excellent vision, and many snakes have essentially no vision at all. They're for all practical purposes blind. Rattlesnakes kind of fall in the middle. So we think that rattlesnakes are myopic, so they can only see, have sharp visual acuity for a relatively short period, short distance. So we're talking a few yards probably for sharp vision. But their heat sensing pits give them a whole nother vision or perspective on the world. So basically, the heat sensing pits that are on a rattlesnake's cheeks, so they're located just below an anterior, forward of the eyes, between the eye and the nostril. Those heat sensing pits on a diamondback can pick up less than a 1 degree temperature difference in their surroundings. So that's good for detecting warm things and also cool things that are cooler in the environment. And those heat-sensing pits, the nerves, actually tie back to the optic nerves. So the way we understand it, these snakes that have heat-sensing pits, and there's several different snakes that have it, vipers all over the world, pit vipers all over the world, but some of the pythons have them and some of the boas have them. So there's a bunch of snakes that have these heat-sensing pits. They are forming an image in the snake's brain, a visual image. And so the best way we understand it is if you can imagine you have a clear face shield, like you would use if you're grinding material or something like that to protect your eyes, over your regular vision, and onto that clear shield, the whole world is projected in infrared. So they're able to see, and then they've got this infrared overlay over that. And, it's a fantastic tool for catching any kind of prey. And a lot of these things like being venomous and the cryptic coloration that you were talking about and these heat sensing pits, they all have a lot more to do with acquiring prey than they do defenses. So the coloration of a rattlesnake where it blends in is so darn hard to see. Well, that's not only to disguise it from potential predators, but probably more importantly, it's to disguise it from potential prey items. So the black rattlesnakes that we see up in the high country here in Arizona, I can't think of a better color than just black like that, because they look just like a dead pine limb. And when they're laying there stretched out, or when they're coiled up, they're almost invisible. They're really difficult to see. And likewise with diamondbacks, and almost every rattlesnake you look at, it's going to match very closely its environment. So this heat sensing ability, this infrared vision, if there's a lizard coming by and it's colder than the surrounding areas, it's going to be able to see that. And if it's a mouse coming by and it's warmer than the surrounding area, it's going to see that. And then basically, if you were to have a rattlesnake in your living room and you were to take off your shoes and walk across that floor, it would be able to see your tracks on the floor until that heat dissipates and it levels out. That's the kind of sensitivity we're talking about, those heat sensing pits. Remarkable adaptations.
And so that's what allows them to hit a mouse with such speed and accuracy then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you'll see them testing the air with their tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Are they picking up scent? Are they picking up temperature?
So it's all scent related. And so, as you know, taste and scent are super closely related. And so we all know that one of the signs of COVID is that you lose your sense of taste. Well, you're losing your sense of smell in there too. And when we have colds and we're all stopped up, you notice food's really bland. It's hard to get the flavor and whatnot. So those scent molecules are picking up when they flick their tongue out. And you'll notice a snake that's really curious or agitated often leaves its tongue out a long time, and it'll flick it up and down, up and down, up and down, back and forth a lot. And then it brings it into the mouth. And in the roof of the mouth is a special organ called a Jacobson's organ. And many reptiles have these organs, and they're developed different ways depending on what the animal's doing. So for a tortoise, they're moderately developed. Tortoises have great senses of smell, but they breathe in that smell through the nares, through the nasal openings. Snakes bring it into the mouth and then flip that tongue up, the tip of the tongue up into the Jacobson's organ in the roof of the mouth. And then it goes in and gets processed just like our regular sense of smells. Their nares, their nose, is solely for breathing. Really, we don't believe there's much olfactory exchange, scent picked up through this nose. So it's mainly that way. And you'll see things like Gila monsters do a lot of tongue flicking as they move around. If you watch the lizards in your yard here in Arizona, I know other parts of the country don't have a lot of lizards, but if you get to watch side blotch lizards or chuck wallows or spiny lizards, you'll see them climb up on a rock and they'll lick the rock. And they're doing the same thing the snake is. They're picking up scent molecules and processing them. And it, just like a dog's pee on a post or a fire hydrant, and it tells the other dogs, everybody that's in the neighborhood, that's the same thing with them. And so their world is more olfactory and other senses than it is visions. Even though vision's really important, it's all these other methods of information that come in. And that's true, so true of many animals, that vision is not their primary source of gaining information. as it is with us.
And, that's hard for folks to understand because we trust eyesight. It's so terribly important to a human. If we lose eyesight, everything else goes away. But you have dogs, just by nature of the way their hair grows, that don't see. I mean, you take a wire hair Griffon or a sheepdog or whatever, and they go through life, with their eyes covered, and they still do fine. And I know I get blind dogs in for training. It's just incredible how effective scent is and how, just like you were saying, that eyesight is secondary to a snake. I really think eyesight on a lot of levels is secondary to a dog.
I wouldn't be surprised that were the case at all. And I'm no expert on dogs, but I do work with snakes a lot. And so it's not true of all snakes, but it's certainly true of the rattlesnakes on the whole, that group, and many of the other snakes. It's equally as true. Things like blind snakes actually have scales covering their eyes, and we don't know that they can see anything beyond a vague difference in ambient light availability. They spend their life burrowing in the ground and foraging on ant larvae under the Earth's surface, and they're actually very seldom active on the surface, and when they are, it's generally at night. So vision means nothing to those animals, and there are a whole host of animals that have eyes that are almost non-existent. So when we, scorpions, for instance, they have very low visual acuity. As far as we know, they don't see anything as far as defining images or anything, but their eyes are incredibly sensitive organs, so much so that we believe one pair of eyes actually tracks the movements of stars across the sky, and they navigate within their environment from the movement of stars, just like ancient mariners did on the ocean. So the animals world is so far distant from everything we know. It's fascinating to start delving into this and seeing how they see things. Along those same lines, spiders on the whole have really crappy vision. Most of them really poor, but you get to the big hunting spiders like wolf spiders, you notice they've got a big sets of eyes in front and then peripheral sets of eyes. Pretty good vision on those. And then you get to jumping spiders, that family Salticidae, incredible eyesight. And what's fascinating to me about that is you look at something like even wolf spiders or tarantulas or other ones, their mating rituals and courtship all have to do with vibration. So they pluck webs, they tap their feet, they do all kinds of little things to send signals to the female that this is what their intent is. As soon as you get to jumping spiders, all of a sudden they have these really elaborate displays and all these colors on them, and they start acting like birds. They do little dances, and they have one species in Australia actually has an abdomen that flattens out and fans like a peacock's tail that has all these colors on it. And so when vision is important, you'll see a lot of colors. You'll see other things like that in animals, and you think about mammals, including dogs. Most of them are pretty monochromatic. They're browns or grays or tans, things like that. And that's usually a good indication if they can see color. If the animals are colorful, they can see color. If they aren't, they generally have very poor color vision.
What does that mean for navigation for a rattlesnake? Because they seem to have, I know they have home ranges, and I know the new research is that they have a fairly limited home range, depending on the availability, the quality of habitat. But they do seem to move effectively within that home range. They know where their thermal covers are. They live in their world, and they're able to navigate that world. And is it scent trails that they're following?
Yeah, we believe it's all chemoreception. So, as we all know, as outdoors people, that animals are habitual. And I can tell you that, banding doves in my yard, I would see the, doves with bands in my yard from 3 or 4 years back. I would see them and I'd say, well, son of a gun, he's back. And so these animals, most animals tend to return to the same places where they've been successful year after year. And this may be nests, these are wintering grounds, these are feeding grounds. So they'll come back and use those again and again. Likewise, rattlesnakes have these, as you mentioned, a home range. Within the animal world, there are territories and home ranges. And territories are defended and home ranges are frequented. So I think the best way for us as humans to think about it, if our home range is the grocery store, the movie theater, all that kind of places we may frequent in the course of a year. And we share that with a bunch of other humans, right? The lines are horrible, the traffic's jammed up, all that. So that's our home range, and many other individuals of our species are sharing that with us. Our territory is like when a stranger comes into your yard, or worse yet, comes into your living room, you're going to challenge them, and there's going to be a fight. There's going to be some kind of confrontation. So territories are defended, and if you're a lion, a bear, even a snake, those things are going to be challenged, and intruders are going to be challenged. Rattlesnakes don't seem to have territories in the respect of that they are defended, so to speak, but there's a lot of confrontation that goes on, and it's usually at den sites or other areas the snake frequents where it encounters a rival male, and it usually has more or less directly tied to reproduction. So there's a female there, then she's receptive, and those guys are going to have it out just like two elk would. And so there's going to be some kind of dominance behavior that's going to determine a winner, and they're going to pick that, or, then that's the guy that has the privilege to mate. And that's usually what most people mistake as mating behavior or courtship behavior. I see two rattlesnakes intertwined and they're rolling around on the ground. That's not mating, that's male combat. And so it's very ritualized within snakes because they don't bite each other. They don't have claws. And that kind of thing. So it's basically like arm wrestling. That's their method. So the more powerful snake will pin the less powerful one again and again until the other guy gets the idea, I'm just not going to win, and then he's going to leave. And usually the victorious male will chase that other male a short distance off, and then he'll come back to the female and he'll start courting her. But even that courtship is not visual. It's all scent and touch. So the male will put his head on top of the female, and he'll vibrate it, and he'll rub it in jerky motions across her back. He'll lay on top of her and court her that way, and then his tail will intertwine with hers, and then they'll copulate, and he'll chase the female around. It's like everything, there's a lot of give and take, unreceptive females. We've all been there, right? We were all in high school, and so that kind of thing happens again and again. But a rattlesnake may mate. They mate often in the spring at the den sites or the brumation sites, and then you'll see it happen on and off out the season, particularly in the late summer and early fall as they're starting to move back. And so a female may mate 2 or 3 times during the course of the season with different males.
And that's a curiosity, because you talked about an exchange between the male and the female, scent, tactile, vibration. Mm-hmm. Folks tend to think of rattlesnakes as sort of automatons that don't have any kind of sentient perception of the world. Having kept rattlesnakes a lot of years, I know they have personalities, temperaments. They're individuals. I know that when I bring a dog in, if the dog's quiet, the snake isn't too upset. But when the dog starts barking, that tends to get them a little bit riled.
Yeah. So when I was in college, and I think this is, if you watch some nature specials from 30 years ago and you watch them today, or you read books, if you want to know about snakes, a great book is Harry Green's book, Snakes, the Myth and Mystery of Evolution. I didn't get the title quite right, but that book was on the New York bestsellers list for weeks, and it's a phenomenal book, kind of hard to find now. And then if you're in Arizona and you're really into snakes now, there's a bigger book that's come out that's just on Arizona snakes, 800 pages. It's called Snakes of Arizona, and it's the most comprehensive, in-depth book, I think. And I sound like, I'm kind of tooting a horn. I was one of the authors in there, but many, many biologists contributed to this book. I think it's the most comprehensive treatment of a fauna that's ever been done. It's really remarkable. So we look at that old research and we compare that to the new stuff. I was taught, these things were pretty simple. They were hardwired. They were born and they did what they did. They were either successful or not successful, and that's just it. With things today, we're seeing all kinds of behavior because our equipment's so better and our level of resolution is so much higher that we never imagined snakes doing. As a matter of fact, all animals. They're so much more complex than we ever had a comprehension of. And so I'm sure we're going to keep discovering things that we never imagined snakes or any other animal do. And so with many rattlesnakes, there seems to be a parental care thing that is, again, would have been sci-fi fantasy 20, 30 years ago. But it's there. We're not sure exactly the role it plays or how it plays, but it's something that's there and occurs. And these young snakes are born and they stay with the mom for 2 weeks or a little bit more, and then they move off on their own. And we don't believe she has anything more to do with them. But there is some evidence that they might be recognized as kin when they return to some den sites. And there's even some stuff where we see young baby rattlesnakes basking with males, unrelated males, and just kind of hanging on with them. And so is it just a nice warm place to coil up? Is there something else going on? But some of the behaviors you just kind of got to scratch your head at and think, I just don't get it. Harry Green had, as a good friend, I had a conversation with him on his research on blacktail rattlesnakes in the Chiricahuas. And one of the males they had marked for a long time, they were standing back and observing him from quite a distance, so they weren't disturbing the snake. And these blacktail rattlesnakes were eating about 4 times a year. That was it. And they were focusing on wood rats, pack rats. And so they're watching this male, and he's moving around, and he picks a site for ambush. And generally, ambush sites are selected based on scent. So they get into an area, and there's a lot of scent there, and they know that animal's are going to revisit that spot, and they just kind of plop down, pick a good spot, and they wait. And even if it's 2 weeks or more, they may just sit in the same spot waiting for that animal to return. So he coils up, picks his spot, and he's sitting there very quietly. Then, after a short period of time, it reaches forward to a piece of grass that's in front of it, and it hooks its body on it, and it bends down and breaks that piece of grass and smashes it down on the ground. And then it moves its head back and rests it on its coil. So what are the implications of this? That snake was able to see an obstacle that might affect its potential success in the future. So this snake actually said, that's a problem. I need to get it out of the way. And that kind of stuff with something that has the brain the size of a BB, it was stuff we never imagined could happen. And that's when it starts to get a little scary, when you start thinking about that kind of behavior in a very, quote, simple animal like a snake. They had this big scenario set up with this javelina that had a hurt leg, and they had me consulting on the script, and they said, and the javelina does this, and he realizes that, and he thinks I got to do this, and he went over there, and I said, really, you're telling me what this javelina is thinking? And they go, well, we got this story here, we got to stick with it. And I said, my wife's the same species. I have no idea what she's thinking about 95% of the time, and you're telling me what a javelina thinks. And so we start getting to their world and how they perceive things. It gets very, very difficult to interpret things, and I would never encourage people not to try to think what they're doing, but I think it's dangerous to start drawing a lot of conclusions just based on our world, because they are experiencing a whole nother, it's like they're on another planet, even though they're right here with us. Their perceptions, their world, everything about it. And it was interesting to me that you mentioned that the dogs would get agitated, or the snakes would get agitated when the dogs start barking, because we know snakes don't have internal ears. So they're picking up vibrations through the ground. And so that tells me the frequency of a dog bark, they're able to pick up those vibrations through those ears that are through their internal ears. They've got a very thin bone that runs down from the back of their skull, and it connects to the jawbone. It rests on it. It's almost as thin as a thread. It's such a delicate little bone. But that's what's transmitting vibrations to their brain, or basically their auditory system. And so they're able to pick that up on a dog. And that's interesting. And there is some research indicating that gopher snakes, if you've ever seen a really ticked off gopher snake, they'll hiss, and they do even a real low guttural hiss. They'll vibrate the tail, and then they'll do this guttural hiss that's kind of along with that. And there's some indication that other gopher snakes can hear that. There's some research indicating that. And that, when you start talking about snakes being able to hear other snakes, that's pretty darn fascinating. And likewise, there's some other research indicating, all these different size snakes have different size rattles. There's some research pointing to the size of the rattle is actually geared toward the potential predators of that snake. And it transmits sounds well within the range of those potential predators. And that's what's driving the size of the rattle. And so things like tiger rattlesnakes have huge rattles. And you look at something like a twin-spotted rattlesnake, they sound like a little, a little soft buzz, like a grasshopper or something. And so, fascinating. This one aspect of the snake's ecology, the auditory thing, is driving all these other peripheral things, what they hear and what their potential predators and prey hear. And so, it's like I said, such a complex picture.
Well, and I know that folks, when I'm working with folks, they have the presumption that the sound of a buzzing snake has something to do with anger or a malicious threat in some way. And that's never been my sense. And typically, from my experience, a snake is afraid when it's buzzing.
Right. So an experiment we can all do, and I've done this many times, and I find overwhelmingly this happens to be the case. If you spot a rattlesnake sleeping, and so they're one of the few snakes that actually sleep on the surface of the ground. So you'll find a rattlesnake sleeping, and when you wake them up because they just come unglued, just like you are. So a stranger came into your bedroom and shook you or woke you up. So they'll, if they're sitting there quietly on the surface and they're alert, if you never look at the snake directly or approach it, and you walk around, do whatever you're going to do, mess around, more often than not, they will sit there quietly and they're going to use crypsis, their camouflage pattern, to escape a potential predator because that's the way they see us. If you turn, look directly at the snake and take a few steps towards it, then generally they stand up, go into the defensive posture and start buzzing. And also, you notice when you catch snakes out in the open, like crossing a road or a path, almost always they go into the defensive thing, and then they try to, sometimes they'll face you and they'll back away, sometimes they'll just dart into a bush, but they're addressing you. And so it's very clear the rattle is about deterring potential predators. That's what it's all about. Exactly how it evolved, there's a lot of thought and stuff because about how it came about. An old theory was that it was to keep large ungulates from treading on them. But what most current wisdom suggests is that rattle first evolved as a lure to bring prey in closer. And there's a whole lot of snakes that do what we call call luring. They use their tail tip, they wiggle it around and make it look like a grub. And of course, the one is the spider tail viper over in the Middle East. If you ever look up that thing, I would encourage all the listeners to look that thing up. It's got the most highly specialized tail I've ever seen on any snake. It's just crazy. It looks just like a salpugid or a spider, and they wiggle it around, and they're mainly bird predators, and birds come in to grab it, and then they grab the bird. And so if you can envision rattlesnakes' early ancestors having a slightly different colored tail, and many rattlesnakes are just that way, sidewinders, Massasaugas, several species have different colored tails when they're young, and then eventually it changes into what we call the adult coloration. But the horny knob at the end helped it look more like a grub or a beetle larvae or something like that. And then for some reason or another, these segments, as it shed, started sticking together and became the rattle. But that's one theory. We don't have any idea exactly how it happened. Rattlesnakes did evolve in the Americas, and their ancestors came across the Bering Land Bridge thousands and thousands of years ago and moved into the Americas, and they were probably something that looked relatively like a copperhead. Matter of fact, there's a thing called protobothrops, Nucrosquamata, how's that for a name, that you find in Southeast Asia that they think are pit vipers, the closest relatives, to the American ones. And it looks kind of like a copperhead, more or less, a bigger, thinner one. And so those things came over and eventually evolved into our rattlesnakes. And it seems like the northern Mexico is the seat of rattlesnake radiation, that they all evolved out there. You start getting more species when you get down there than you do anywhere else. So, yeah, it's really complex, really mysterious, and wonderful to sit around and think about.
Well, I know that I make the point with folks because, of course, there's a lot of concern. They're out with their dog and they come upon the snake and they assume something bad's going to happen. And I make the point to folks that frenetic feeling you get when you're afraid doesn't help matters much. That if you respect the animal, you don't make eye contact, you don't engage it, you just quietly walk away from it, it's unlikely the snake will even acknowledge you in any way. And Randy, I've heard it hundreds of times. My dog stepped right on it. Yeah. My dog stepped right over it. I stepped on it. I stepped over it. If that snake doesn't think you know it's there, they'll often just lay there very still and wait for you to go away.
That's entirely true. And so these snakes aren't intelligent in the respect of we think of, rocket scientist or, even a high school student or even a grade school student is the way we gauge intelligence. And that's another big problem with the animal world. We perceive intelligence is and what animal intelligence is. They're two very different things. So they know, they have an intrinsic knowledge that they have nothing to gain by getting in confrontations with something our size or the size of your dog or the size of a toddler or a house cat even. They're not going to win. They're not going to get something to eat. And they're going to expend a lot of resources that are very difficult to replace by having a confrontation. So imagine yourself in a hunting blind with a bow and a giant, the biggest grizzly you've ever seen in your life comes walking by at 15 yards. What are you going to do? You're not going to piss it off. You're going to try to make yourself as small as you can, and you're going to let that pass. That's exactly what they're doing. They're not going to have that confrontation. And even manufacturing venom is a very costly thing for the snakes. So they only expend or bite things when they perceive it's a last resort. And as you mentioned, snakes have different personalities and individuals have different personalities. And so they have good days and bad days like us, and all kinds of things can happen. But as we know, a good deal of rattlesnake bites are dry bites. They aren't injecting any venom. And so you would think of that more or less like a dog snapping at you that doesn't want you around or something. It's just saying, get away. And generally after, some guy's been beating on it with a stick for 5 minutes and stuff, and then he gets a hold of them, those are really bad bites. And so that's not always absolutely true, but in general, snakes don't strike even when they have a chance. And I've got a little anecdote. A friend of mine and I were doing a plant plot. So we had a 30-meter square, and we were documenting every plant on that. We started early in the morning. We walked out the middle, set our packs down, and we were on our hands and knees till I'm thinking like mid-afternoon. And we're crawling all over, measuring plants and charting them all like that. And we stand up, and my friend Barry looks at me and he goes, "Look at the size of that diamondback by your pack." We had crawled over that snake all day long. We were so focused on what we were doing, we never saw it. He could have bit each of us dozens of times, and he did not want to. What I am kind of surprised is that he stayed there, because most of the time, if you see a rattlesnake and it sees you, even if you don't bother it, if you know the snake sees you, if you come back in 15 minutes or so, it's generally gone. So that snake obviously didn't feel safe leaving, and so he was just going with what was working, but it didn't want anything to do with us.
Well, I can tell you another story. Again, many years ago, we had just moved on to a new place. We were out on the flat desert north of the Catalinas, and we'd been there just a few days. It was a single-wide trailer on 20 acres, and there was nothing around us, all state tribes. And about 10 o'clock at night, we had half a dozen setters in the house. I go to open the door to let them out. Now, it's the middle of summer. It is hotter than the dickens. I'm wearing shorts and flip-flops and nothing else. Full bright moon. You could read outside. It was so bright. So I open the door, I send the dogs out, and I walk down the wood steps, and it's just flat dirt for like a big driveway, a circular drive in front of this trailer. Flat, no brush, no nothing. And I start doing what all of us have done. I start walking figure eights, and I'm admonishing the dogs. Come on, guys, hurry up. Let's go. Come on, hurry up. Come on, let's go. And they're just swirling around me, just swirling. And I've been there 2 minutes, 3 minutes maybe, moving constantly. And Nicole comes to the door, and she looks out, and she says, "Why don't you turn a light on?" And she flips a switch, and there's a coiled diamondback about 8 inches to the side of my foot. Now, dogs had to have stepped on it multiple times. I don't know how I didn't step on it. I'm sure I would have felt it if I'd stepped on it. But I was within inches of it repeatedly. Okay? Never moved, never made a sound. Now, this is not a cold, this is a warm night. Everything is optimal, okay, from the perspective of the rattlesnake. I send the dogs in the house. I go get a capture pail, a stick, and pick him up and gently put him in this capture pail and move him off. Never moved, never made a sound. Now, that's the norm, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah, I think it is. And so there's two stories I see reoccurring in the media. And I think probably you all have seen these too. One of them is rattlesnakes rattle less than they used to. And they say, oh, they're getting used to people and stuff. And so that's a bunch of hooey. This is what they've always done. And the other one is that snakes are getting more venomous. They're developing stronger venom and things. So we do know there's a biological race between snake and prey where they're constantly co-evolving to be one to become, trying to become more resistant to the predations of the snake, and the snakes trying to become more efficient. But this happens over a tremendous period of time where it's not like any human lifetime. We're talking about a long period of time for this happening. The biggest problem with these things is like with all science kind of stuff, you need to know where you've been to know where you're at. So we have zero data on how venomous snakes were 100 years ago, 50 years ago. We hardly have anything. And rattling data is non-existent. And so to say they're rattling more or they become more venomous, you can't say that because we don't know what they were, 100 years ago. And so these are real common things that pop up like that. And I think everybody's just got to put their BS meter on and just think about it for a second and think, yeah, not so much. And it's just what they do. It just, they've had, there are lots of things that eat rattlesnakes. I mean, a lot of things. And this is why they look the way they do, the way they act the way they do. Everything about it is about getting prey and avoiding becoming prey. And that's what governs the lives of most animals. And then, of course, the reproductive imperative kind of overrides all that because we know you watch mule deer rutting and stuff and some of these animals, and they become like the 15-year-old male many of us once were.
Spring is in the air.
Yeah, that's right. And you think about one thing and a lot of animals make mistakes doing that, but that's part of the natural selection of everything.
Well, that I think that brings me to an interesting point, because what I'm fascinated with is the interactions that can't be seen, that aren't understood, those connections, two rattlesnakes together, the connection between the dog and a rattlesnake or a human and a rattlesnake. You're walking down a trail, snake's coiled, he's off to the side, he's up against a rock, he's got some thermal cover there. And he makes a decision. Much of that decision is predicated upon what the human feels or the way human acts or what the human's projecting on a level that the human doesn't understand. Now, you're a dog guy. You have had English setter or English pointers most of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what that kind of dog-human connection can be. You're with a dog, you're running a dog. That dog's bonded to you. That dog's cueing off of you, reading your mind in a lot of cases. And so I'm just wondering what the science will tell us at some point. If there's a way to understand that connection, how can a human and a dog bond so completely?
There's actually a bunch of really neat research out there, and folks can look it up. And they've been doing a lot with dogs. And so, we know that dogs' ancestors, domestic dogs' ancestors, were a wolf-like animal. And there's some debate over exactly what it was, but, it was a fox-wolf kind of thing. And dogs have been domesticated for an awful long time, even though we don't know exactly how that all happened. But they have been tied with humans. What a lot of things I've read is basically dogs think they're people. And they are reading you. You know, you walk in the house in a bad mood and you know your dog's just staying away from you. You know, things like that. When you get mad at your bird dog when he doesn't return, he knows he's been goofing up and he comes slinking back. And so there's that kind of thing. And they've done experiments where they've put people in rooms with a dog and they've hidden a treat that the dog can't smell. And the dog can sit in the room and figure out where the treat is just by watching the person. And they can go and retrieve it. They do that with something like a wolf, and the wolf has no clue. It cannot make that connection. It has no idea what's going on. It can't do that. And so our bond with that dog that you are so familiar with, all of us have dogs, are so familiar with, it's not like anything else out there in the animal world. It is an amazing thing. And the domestic dog is a unique creature in that respect. I mean, they are amazing at reading people, figuring out what you want. Just think about training them. You know, you have those dogs that are knuckleheads, and of course, and you have those dogs that just train themselves. They, you know, you do one or two corrections on them and they got it figured out. They know what you want. And I think you would speak to this much better than I am. I think the biggest difficulty in training a dog is the dog understanding what you're asking it to do. Because once they figure that out, they're out there to please you. And think about how many animals are out there to please you. I mean, your cat isn't, you know, and so these, you know, and I think my child that wasn't a concern of hers for most of her life. Mm-hmm. And so these, you know, it's incredible. There's not another animal out there really like a dog.
And, you know, that's, I think, an important point, because people think that dogs came from wolves. And from what I've read with the genetics that they're doing now, that it wasn't a wolf. It was a separate kind of a canine that was the precursor to our current dog.
Yeah.
And I know in training, I use wolf sounds. And there is something primal about the sound of a wolf to a canine. When I first started experimenting with using different sounds in training, I had set up a predator caller, Foxborough predator call. And you've been to the house. You know, I live on the ridge of a mountain range that looks out over just oak trees and houses, a community of about 3,500, 4,000 people. So it's not a big place, but there's homes packed in and they just fall away to the desert floor. And so I set up a speaker and I crank it loud and I turn on the sound of a lone wolf howling. And it was a completely unexpected response on my end that I got, because when I flipped that sound on, every dog lit up. Every dog, all the way down to the desert floor.
I bet you were popular.
Well, I turned it off real fast and I didn't turn it back on again. But the thing is that they kept howling for probably 4 minutes. There was something that they identified with that sound. And it wasn't, you know, like when you're with your dogs, and I know we had a little water hole when we lived out on the flat desert, and the dogs each had their own particular bark for all the different things that came in. There was the deer bark, the javelina bark, the hawk bark, the quail bark. This was a unique howl. The way they responded, it was almost panicked and aggressive, you know. They immediately, and I mean, everywhere, all over it, you just heard dogs light up. So it's sort of a false assumption that we humans have that, a fox is a dog, is a coyote, is a wolf. They're different creatures. They are different. And even a coyote and a dog, very different animals, you know, very different animals.
Yeah. One of the things that intrigues me in nature, and we're kind of getting off topic here, but if you're a predator, nature wants you to be primarily, if you're going to be an apex predator, it wants you to be one of two things. You're either going to be a cat or you're going to be a dog. You're going to be a lion, a tiger, mountain lion, jaguar, leopard, whatever, or you're going to be a wolf, you're going to be a fox, you're going to be something like that. And it's such a powerful evolutionary force that even widely disparate lineages like marsupials become wolf-like because of those pressures. So we look at the thylacine or the Tasmanian tiger or Tasmanian wolf. that thing's a glorified opossum for all practical purposes, but it looks like a dog-like predator. And likewise, during prehistoric times, there were marsupial saber-toothed cats that were huge, massive, powerful predators. But they were, even though they looked like a cat, they weren't even distantly related to them. So that's what it wants you to be. And I think when we get back to snakes and things like that, we all know javelina hate dogs. And there are, that form, that predatory form, that dog-like form is universally recognized by potential prey species, including snakes, and likewise with cats. Things are afraid of cats, including us. I've been in Africa sleeping on a platform and had a lion troop come through, and they're doing that low rumbling thing, and I woke up at 2 a.m. I could feel it in my gut. And I'm thinking, am I far enough from the edges to where I'm likely to survive if one decides to come in here? Fortunately, I was kind of towards the middle. I figured they'd get one of the other guys first. But I've never had that experience before. I knew exactly what it was, and I knew it wasn't anything to mess with. And so big predators, apex predators, and our dogs are perceived as apex predators by most of the other wildlife out there, including quail and things like that. That's the kind of response you're going to get. And that wolf thing, that's interesting because wolves eat the heck out of coyotes. We know that from the introductions here in Arizona and other places. And when wolves come in, the coyote population goes down. They are not friends. And likewise, the big cats are not friendly to other cats, including their own kind. So more mountain lions are killed by other mountain lions than anything else. And every time you get in these big predator groups, bears, lions, canids, they're the major predator on their closest relatives and even their own kind oftentimes. Alligators, it works that way too. Big alligators kill the heck out of small alligators. So they just don't tolerate anybody that's coming in messing with their resources, either females or food. They're not going to have any of it.
Well, it's certainly a lot of mystery involved because there's so much we just don't understand. So much we humans just don't perceive.
Right.
We're so limited when we compare it even to our dogs. They have such a greater sense or ability to sense things than I think we do. And I know there's probably things that we don't understand, but we utilize, where our dogs are probably much better at it, just because they live with us and they have to keep track of us and kind of monitor us and figure us out, where many people don't really pay a lot of attention to anything but human stuff.
I think that's very true. And so, 2 thoughts come to mind. One is I've hunted birds a lot all my life, and I've hunted with a lot of different guys. I've never had a fellow hunter point a quail. And so, our perceptions of our world around us are so different, and we're relying on a totally different set of senses. The next thing is, again, for the viewers or the listeners that are interested, look up echolocation in humans. So we know that lots of animals use echolocation. Dolphins and some shrews do. Bats are the famous ones. And so there's a whole bunch of animals that are using this. And there's actually been several human beings that have learned to echolocate. And to watch these people, there's videos of them, they're amazing. And so they're blind folks, typically, and they now go around and they actually just click. They literally like this. And they've trained themselves to actually echolocate just like a bat or a dolphin or anything else. And they'll walk down the street with those people and say, there's a curb there. There's a telephone pole. This is a mailbox. And they can actually differentiate not only that there's an object there, but what it is. And so they say we use a fraction of our brain, and that's probably true of our other senses. And maybe if we didn't have dogs, we'd learn to smell quail. I don't know if we tried hard enough. But the point being is that because of the world we live in and our lifestyles, we're mainly visual and auditory. And we know what tastes good and we know what smells good, but really we're relying primarily on those 2 senses 95% of the time. And all these other ones become subservient. And once we are deprived of another one, or if we train ourselves otherwise, we can elevate those senses to some degree. Now, of course, we're limited by our form and stuff like that because we're not really designed to echolocate or things. But these things are still there available to us, often in some kind of vestigial fashion that could be exploited. And who knows what may happen in a few million years, what senses might become most important to us, whatever. But what's fascinating about evolution is that theoretically, everything that went into your development, any animal, so let's take a bird, so all these early bird ancestors, some of them had teeth, some of them had claws on the wings and all this kind of stuff like that. Those are all there in the evolutionary bag of tricks, and those genes for those are turned off right now. And should natural selection or pressures arise to where those things are needed again, it's quite possible those genes could get turned on, and all of a sudden you end up with an animal that starts looking different. And that's really the marvel and the amazing thing about evolution. I mean, we share most of our genome with the earthworm. I mean, like 80% of it or something. But by the time we get to a primate like a chimp, we're looking at, I'm not a geneticist, but I think it's something like 3% difference. And so there is a formula, a set of tools out there that is universal amongst almost all living organisms on this planet, like bilateral symmetry. Even if you look at fish, 2 pectoral fins, 2 pelvic fins, we've got arms and we've got legs, there's analogous to that, and there's very few things that break that mold. And so that's the plan for life on this planet. And these things are all there, out there. And, people are taller than they used to be. We know that from history. And so all this stuff. So there's quite a bit of give and take out there that can come into play. And heaven's sakes, dogs, what in the Sam Hill is a pug dog? And why on earth is that thing alive? And so in the natural world, that thing would never exist, but we've taken it and pulled it out, and cultivated those things like that. But, what we call dogs, look at the diversity in there. I mean, heaven's sakes, it's remarkable that you can even call those the same animal. And so, but they are Canis domesticus. Mm-hmm. And that kind of blows me away. Those are a great example of just how bizarre things are there and all those options.
Well, that probably brings us to a good point to reflect on all those great mysteries. And we're going to throw it back to the folks out there listening to this podcast. We've enjoyed having this conversation with Randy, and I hope it's triggered some stuff for you to think about. It is a big, big world out there, and you and your dog aren't alone in it. You are walking through that world with an entire myriad, uncountable amount of different perceptions and thoughts and ways of seeing the world and feeling the world and smelling the world. And with that, I'm going to sign off and wish you a great day. Look forward to you listening in the future. Take care. This is Webb Parton at freerangedogs.com signing off.
If you like this episode, I invite you to visit our website, freerangedogs.com. It's where you can find the stuff you need to live the free-range dog lifestyle. I want to help you with that. Book a consultation call or an in-person training, attend one of our ongoing events, or join our online membership program. We got it all on freerangedogs.com. All right, it's time to head back to the truck and the water bucket for the thirsty dogs. This is Webb Parton signing off, wishing you the boundless joy that comes when you share the outdoors with your best friend.